Mosaic Law concerning violence? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Exodus on walking through the Bible.
Of his word, the glory of his cross.
If you have a Bible with you, you can turn to Exodus chapter 21. We're going to be reading from verses 12 to 21. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Exodus 21, beginning at verse 12. He who strikes a man so that he dies shall surely be put to death. However, if he did not lie in wait, but God delivered him into his hand, then I will appoint for you a place where he may flee. But if a man acts with premeditation against his neighbor to kill him by treachery, you shall take him from my altar that he may die. And he who strikes his father or mother shall surely be put to death. He who kidnaps a man and sells him, or if he is found in his hand, shall surely be put to death. And he who curses his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. If men contend with each other, and one strikes the other with a stone or with his fist, and he does not die, but is confined to his bed, if he rises again and walks about outside with his staff, then he who struck him shall be acquitted. He shall only pay for the loss of his time, and shall provide for him to be thoroughly healed. And if a man beats his male or female servant with a rod, so that he dies under his hand, he shall surely be punished. Notwithstanding, if he remains alive a day or two, he shall not be punished, for he is his property. What we see here in chapter 21 and all the way up to the end of chapter 23 are the judgments of the Lord that would be included in the book of the covenant, and thus would be part of the law of Moses or the Old Testament law. In our last episode, we had regulations concerning Hebrew slaves. We do not have time to discuss that entire episode again here, so if you're watching on YouTube, please click on the left-hand link that will be present at the end of the video to listen to that episode. Or if you're listening on any other platform, all videos can be found at www.eastendchurch.org under the Media/W.T.T.B English Podcast tab. In today's reading, we find God's many regulations concerning violence. Those regulations will continue in verses 22 to 27, but since they concern pregnant women, we'll discuss those regulations separately. When it came to violence, whether verbal or physical, punishment was generally severe. A person who struck a man so that the man dies was to be put to death. That would agree with what God told Noah in Genesis 9, verse 6. Society today views capital punishment as immoral, but it isn't if it is applied equitably. That means the same justice no matter of race, gender, or economic status. If society would put the same value on life that God does and exact the same punishments on a fair and equal basis, I'm fairly confident that there would be less crime. But no, our laws are not always administered equally, leading some to believe that they are above the law. So they go out and commit crimes like murder. God here in Exodus 21 calls killing a person for what it is, murder, and it is punishable by death. However, just as we talk about in chapter 20, sometimes someone is killed, but the killing was done by accident. The phrase God delivered him into his hand should not be taken to mean anything more than he met someone by chance, for the providence of God does bring about meetings that we would call accidental. If someone was killed without premeditation, the killing was not murder. However, the killer wasn't guiltless. God would appoint a place where the person may flee, a city of refuge. Since we won't see those explained until Numbers 35, we'll save our comments on those cities until then. Getting back to premeditated murder, however, not even fleeing to the altar of God would prevent the death penalty being exacted on the murderer. Joab, David's general, would find this out in 1 Kings chapter 2. The death penalty, though, was not only reserved for murderers. It was also reserved for those who strike their parents. The word strike here does not mean kill their parents, for such would be dealt with in verses 12 to 14. Instead, the word strike means hit their parents. This passage isn't referring to young children who do not know the difference between right and wrong. It is referring to children who are old enough to know the difference, yet strike their parents anyway. The fifth commandment was honor your father and mother. This was the first commandment directed to Israel after the first four concerning God. That's how high God views the relationship between parents and children. Children were not to strike their parents, or they would be put to death. My, what a different place this world would be if that was practiced today. We then move on to kidnapping. Anyone who kidnaps another, whether he sells them or not, was to be put to death. The person didn't even have to die. Kidnapping was seen as so egregious that it was a capital crime worthy of death. Verse 17 then returns to parents and children. Not only were children not to physically abuse their parents, they weren't to verbally abuse them either. Like with physical abuse, verbal abuse by children was punishable by death. Verses 18 and 19 deals with a fight between two people. If during this fight one strikes the other with a stone or a fist and he does not die, but is confined to a bed and later rises up, the person will be acquitted of the assault, but have to pay the man for the time he couldn't work while in bed, as well as his medical costs. If the person died, then the one who killed the man would be dealt with, like with what we read about earlier. And finally, we turn to if a person strikes their servants or slaves. There were many protections granted to slaves, and there were many restrictions placed on masters under the law of Moses. However, sometimes a slave would be beaten by their master, either for cause or without cause. If the beating was so strong that the slave died immediately, then the slave owner would be punished, like any other murderer. However, if the slave lived and only died a day or two later, then the master wouldn't be punished, for the master wouldn't be considered to have intended to kill the slave, and so the loss of his property, the slave, would serve as a punishment enough. With that, our time is up for today. Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Exodus chapter 21, verses 22 to 27, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.